2024 was such a bumper reading year for me that I actually had to track my reading across 2 notebooks because I ran out of room in the first one. The mustard-coloured B5 got me from January through to September, and the little compass traveller-sized journal got me from October through to the end of the year. Let's flip through every page of both and also add some final little updates. Hi, it's Erin, and I read 96 books in 2024. Before we get into the flip through, a word from our sponsors today, Skillshare. I think a lot of us have been making resolutions around prioritising the things we love for 2025, myself included. The vibe is less hustle, more joy. If you're a serial creative hobbyist like me and you're hoping to pour more time into a creative discipline this year, you might just need Skillshare in your life. I'm currently focusing on learning to make digital art with Procreate, and I figured I'd start with something familiar like lettering. I'm halfway through a class called Procreate Lettering for Beginners, the fundamentals of drawing beautiful letters digitally with Kristen De Palma. It's just the initial sketch, I'm not up to adding color yet, but I've already learned so much about Procreate's tools and functions. If you're not familiar with Skillshare, it's a place for creatives to learn from other creatives on demand and at your own pace. You learn by doing when you learn with Skillshare, so at the end of every class, you've got a finished project you can share with the Skillshare community and get feedback on your work. Did I mention they're the largest online platform for creative learning? There are literally thousands of classes across so many creative pursuits: film and video, writing and publishing, crafts and DIY, photography, illustration, you name it. Plus productivity, marketing, and personal development class categories too, in case your resolutions are about launching your creative business or side hustle this year. I really think making time to create regularly can do wonders for your skill level and your mental health, so it makes sense to prioritize it like you would your physical health and wellness. And Skillshare is the perfect place to get started, and I can help you with that. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Now let's flip through these journals. We're going to start with the bigger one because that is where the year started, so that makes the most sense. Something I've been really enjoying in the past couple of years is decorating the nameplate page of my journal. That just feels like extra personalization to me, and I really enjoy it. I actually did this one on a live stream with my channel members. Only the right side though, because the left side was already so pretty. I included a grid spacing guide in this journal, but I really didn't find I ever flipped back to this page, so it probably wasn't necessary, but it was a weird and awkward first page anyway. And this is my cover spread for the initial setup for the beginning of this journal. And this whole setup is available on my channel in case you'd like to watch how it all came together. There is a link to it in the description, as well as all of the monthly setups in this journal and the other one. Just a bit of trivia, the initial setup for this journal is now one of my most viewed videos on the channel ever, so thank you so much for the love you showed that video. You can see I gave up on my index about March here. I was adding the page numbers to each of the pages myself, but I gave up on that pretty quickly. It just wasn't necessary, so I left that one behind. The rating page I came back to all the time though for the references to the core power rating system. I'm not using that next year, in fact I'm using my own rating system instead. I have a video on that in case you'd like to find out how it works. This is the list of every book that I read, although it only goes up to 81 down here because then I ran out of space and I tracked the rest of them in the other journal. Over the page I've got my goal tracker, which I also kind of abandoned again because I moved that into the next journal when I ran out of space in this one. And over here on the right side is my anticipated reads. I've called this Release Radar in my next journal. I haven't used it a huge amount, but it's a place to track books that are coming out in the next year so that I can remember that they're coming. I finished a couple of series in 2024 and I started a bunch of new ones, so that spread really expanded, and these 2 pages were for my book clubs. The one on the right there, the Page Majors, is actually my book club that I run through the channel membership program here on YouTube, so you can join that one if you'd like to, if you join the channel on the Page Majors level. The book bracket was fun, but it didn't feel very accurate to me, so it's not something I'm bringing forward with me into 2025, but I do think it's an impressive looking page. And I don't like the term TBR or to be read, so I call it maybe next. And actually I can cross something off here because I did read the first book in the Zodiac Academy series. I won't be reading any more, but I did read that one. I haven't been using the maybe next pages as much as I expected. I'd set up 2 of them, 2 spreads worth, and then didn't really use the second one, so I knew I could dial that back for 2025. I really like to include monthly stats pages and monthly progress tracking pages for my reading, so that's what this is that we're looking at here for January. If you'd like to see how I set up any of these ones specifically, or even just find out my thoughts on any of the books that I have review pages for in this video, you can check out those monthly setup videos at the links in the description too. My previous reading journal before this one was an A5 size for 2023, and coming from that into the B5 journal, I just felt like I had so much page space to play with, and that really made me feel free to add decoration to each of my book review pages. And sometimes that was minimal, like the one for Inner Jam here on the left, and sometimes I really went for it. Typically, I went for a book review to a single page, but there are a few cases where I just had extra pages left over, or I was anticipating an amount of space I'd need and it ended up being a little bit more than I actually needed, so in some cases I've got double page spreads as well. And in other cases, I've got really minimal reviews. That tended to happen later on in the year because I started making 2 videos a week and had less time for reading overall. So every now and then there will be a page that doesn't have, or this one basically doesn't even have anything on it because I didn't feel like I had more to say about this book. This was a book club read, so on the right are the book club questions we discussed in our little video chat. And the left side would have been my normal review, but I felt like I'd said everything I needed to say already. But yes, later on there will be some reviews that are just kind of a border and the book cover and some text, and that's it. Are the Improbable Meet cute? If I had counted this one as 6 separate stories, I would have hit my reading goal for the year of 100 books, but because I just counted it as one, I am considered behind. I didn't reach it, and that's okay. This is a compilation of 6 different stories by 6 of the biggest romance authors, and that's why I've counted it as one book, because I did get it as one book through Audible, but just semantics, right? Like, it doesn't really matter. I think you can tell a little bit from my decoration how much I enjoyed some books more than others, because I do tend to put in a little bit more effort if I really enjoyed a book versus if I thought it was just okay. But occasionally I will do a really pretty page for a book that I didn't enjoy that much just because I have the perfect stationery to suit it, like the right stickers or washi tapes or whatever. I don't find that I choose not to finish books very often, but it does happen occasionally. I think there were only 4 books throughout 2024 that I didn't finish, and this was one of them, and it was for a book club. I'm so sorry to my friend who chose this one. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, I just couldn't do it. And I know this is a beloved book, but I just wanted you to know why this page was empty except for some writing and a book cover. Something I do really enjoy about the book club experience, though, depending on the book club that you're part of, is that it really encourages me to read more broadly. I read in genres and from authors that I wouldn't usually have heard of or found on my own or maybe have picked up based on the blurb, so that's something I find really enjoyable, and some of my favourite reads this year were books that I never would have touched for myself. I just said this year, didn't I? I meant last year. I'm having some trouble getting my head around it being 2025. It's actually really interesting to see Empire of Storms in here because I left it a really long time between reading that book and the next Throne of Glass book that's after it, which I have just finished in January 2025. So funny that, I really needed a break from that series. I finished it in March, so that means I needed a 10-month break, but I'm back on the horse now. Or the wyvern, as it were. See, Flawless here got a pretty good rating. I gave it 4 stars, but it got a full spread because it was right before I needed to set up for a new month, and so it went across both pages. Also, I just had the right stationery. I had some stuff with horses on it, and it was just the perfect time. Our Page Majors read for April here, Sourdough by Robin Sloan, is one of those books that I would never have picked up on my own. It was suggested by one of the book club members, and it was phenomenal. So if you're looking for something really engrossing but pretty low stakes, nothing too heavy as far as life things going on in it, definitely give that one a go. It's funny and it's quirky, and if you're into audiobooks, I did that one on audiobook, and the way they approached it was so entertaining. I think part of the reason my reading journal is my favourite journal to work in is because I don't put any pressure on it. I don't need these spreads to look amazing. I just need them to look kind of okay, fun enough for me to use, definitely, and do their jobs. I typically don't plan out the monthly setups for my reading journal anywhere near as much as I do for my bullet journal. I put a lot more time and effort into curating the bullet journal. The reading journal is not curated, and I think that's part of what makes it so much fun. It's a deliberate mess, and I like it that way. I'm kind of a mood reader. I do read most of my books through the library, so it depends on how long I have to wait for things to become available and hold periods and stuff like that. So I guess there is some planning involved in choosing what I read next, but I really don't think too hard about it. It's like a combination of vibes and library availability. This June theme I actually loved so much that it inspired the initial setup for my new bullet journal for 2025. In case you're thinking these washi tapes and PET tapes and things look familiar, that might be why, because I used them partly because they match the cover of this journal, that's just too good, but also I loved the way they look together so much. So whatever the journaling equivalent of an outfit repeater is, I am that. Which is just another point in the reading journal's favour, because it's a great place to kind of practice and test out using elements together to see if you want to use them together later in a different setup. On the right here, we've got a couple of those more minimal reviews that I mentioned earlier. These ones are only half a page because they were both novellas, so there wasn't as much to say as if it was a full-length book. Also, I was noticing how much of the journal I was getting through, like the rate that I was getting through these pages, and so I was starting to try to conserve space in the book a little bit more than I had been back at the beginning. Also, waterfall tabs in a B5 journal, so much fun. You still have so much page space left over even when you remove a bunch from one side. It's fantastic. I recommend it if you like this journal size. You can tell I'm coming to the end of what I could fit in this journal because I start to have these full 2-page spreads for my book reviews, even when I thought the book was just okay. So that's because I knew I had a few pages left and I wanted to use up kind of what I could, but I didn't have enough space to add another monthly setup plus sort of around 10 books after that, so it was time from here to move into a new journal. I also have this little graveyard of book covers at the back here. That's because sometimes my little HP sprocket prints an extra copy of things. It just glitches out sometimes, but if you're interested in how I print the book covers for my reading journal with the sprocket, I have a short about that I'll have linked for you in the description too. So many links. I also have some swatches on the page just before this, and a little handful of empty spreads here too that if I need to try something out in a B5 journal, I have these on hand that I can use those for, otherwise they'll probably just stay blank. That's okay, there's not that many of them, so I'm alright with that. Thank you for your service, Mustard B5 Charming Picnic Journal. Despite not really loving the colour of this journal, I've loved using it. And hello to the Traveller Size Compass Journal. Does this book not look like it was made to fill with adventures? I could not think of a more appropriate cover for a reading journal. I really expected to find it difficult to transition from a huge journal into this tiny one, but I actually didn't find that to be the case at all. It was really quite comfortable to settle into this one. I knew I needed some extra space for some of the trackers that I hadn't left myself enough room for in the previous journal. Look at that sparkle. Love it so much. So I gave this one its own new journal setup as well. And I deliberately used a lot of the same papers and washi tapes and stickers as in the previous journal so that this one really felt like a continuation. This spread literally is a continuation of the book's read list that is in the previous journal, so it is a continuation in every way. It also gave me the chance to include a spread that I wished I'd included at the beginning of my previous journal. This is a Hall of Fame spread, which is basically just a place to celebrate all of the books that I loved. And we're gonna fill this one out together right now. I didn't have any 5-star reads for the year because the way I was using the Corpal rating system was just way too critical, which is part of why I've made my own rating system. But these are all books that scored over 4 stars, and I think that warrants putting them in a bit of a Hall of Fame spread. And the book bracket doesn't give the opportunity for months where you read more than one great book to feature those, so this is my workaround. I have missed one though, I mentioned it earlier, Sourdough by Robin Sloan should also be on this spread, but I forgot to print a book cover for it. Also with these book covers, I didn't do these ones with the sprocket, I've just printed these ones on printer paper with my home inkjet printer and cut them out with my Cricut as little kiss cut stickers because I knew if I wanted to do them in bulk, it would be much faster that way. I'd love to know if any of these books were also on your favourites list for 2024, or if any of them are maybe on your list of books to read in 2025. I'll admit I did a little bit of maths to make sure that I could fit these all on the single spread. I made them 7 dot grid spaces tall, which is 3.5 centimeters because the dot grid is 5 millimeters. And I didn't actually change the width of them, I just let them be whatever width was appropriate when scaled to that height. But it's somewhere in the vicinity of 4 dot grid spaces wide. And I sourced them all from Goodreads in case you're wondering where I got these book covers. And for the yellow wood, I did actually make the square cover into a regular book orientation. I love seeing how many of the books that made it onto this spread were actually book club selections. That just makes me really happy. And Sourdough, if it was on here too, that would make it 4. The page majors just have really good taste, clearly. Even though I had a page already for tracking book club things in the previous journal, I wanted to add some bigger versions here just to really try out the Traveller Size journal. My reading goal bookshelf here needs a little update as well. I just wanted to check how many books I actually got up to, and in flipping back to this page, I've realized it's actually missing one book that I finished right at the end of the year. I did a review page for it, but I forgot to actually come back and just add the title to this list. So that's The Kingdom of Sweets by Erica Johansson. And once it's down on this list, I can also add some color to my bookshelf to make sure I've got all my December reads tracked. I've really enjoyed this matching the color of the book spine that I'm coloring into the color of the tracking pages that I set up for that month, but I knew having these empty books at the end was going to really bother me, so this is the color I've chosen for I did not read these books, and I'm just going to color it in that color. And that just makes me feel better about having a finished page. We're getting back into the monthly tracking stuff now. We're into October here. With the limited space, I really enjoyed doing full cover spreads and full progress tracking calendar spreads. I also hosted a little reading challenge in October, so I made sure to include the information for that in my journal too, as well as the corresponding book bingo that was part of that challenge. I remember when I was setting this up, because it was such a different sized book, I actually forgot my stats page and I put my PageMajors review spread first, and then I added my stats page after that. I was adding a themed kind of part of the initial setup for each month page for the PageMajors book, but I found that it didn't match the theme of the book quite often, so I've decided to stop doing that and just give it its own decorated page or spread the way that I do for other books. You can definitely fit a single book review on a single spread in a traveler-sized journal, like that's doable, but I found I was really enjoying playing with Dutch doors and removing some of the paper and seeing what I could do with that in such a small journal. It felt like a little challenge at first, and then I enjoyed it so much that I kept it going for quite a few of the book reviews throughout the rest of the year. If you find yourself running out of pages in your larger journal with a little bit of the year still left, then I would definitely recommend moving into a traveler size to get you through the rest of the year. Or maybe some other small journal size, like a little A6 or something, I think could work really well too. It really felt like it took the pressure off me, it gave me a lot of freedom to play and explore, and I still got to finish my reading journal in a really satisfying way. Since we're getting into the more recent stuff now, there are a couple of spots that might need some little updates along the way. I was missing a book cover here for my standout book, which was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder in November. I'd originally planned to add just a small book cover there, but I didn't have 3 others to print off at the same time, and I didn't factor this into printing the book covers for the Hall of Fame, so I'm just going to do a full-size sprocket print and put it on the other page because there's room for it there. It's not leaving me with the most balanced layout ever, but at this stage, I don't really care. Kingdom of Sweets was my last read for December, so it was my last read for the year, so it's the last review that's in the journal. And then I have actually quite a few spreads still left over. I have used most of the journal, but I still had a decent amount here to play with, and I like adding the end of year stats that Goodreads and Storygraph give you to the back of my journal. Mostly just Storygraph, actually. I don't really use the Goodreads ones, I just like to look at them. So I've gone through and printed off some of my stats so I can include them in the journal here, and because I'm working with smaller pages, I thought I would kind of categorize them. So we'll have like overall stats, and then we'll have one specific to rating and a spread specific to the amount of time spent on books, and I thought that would be interesting and fun. I also still have some of this paper left over that I used in the journals. Well, actually it was the green, but I've got some blue as well, so I'm going to alternate between the blue and the green for these stats pages. I wanted it to still feel like a cohesive extension of the initial setups, but I also didn't want to spend a lot of time on it, so I'm just kind of adding a bit of paper and then put in my stats right over the top. And I printed my stats out on sticker paper so it would be really easy. I also made myself a couple of titles as well. And again printed it all onto sticker paper and cut it out with my Cricut as kiss cut stickers so I would have a really easy time assembling these pages. In 2024, I read 96 books, but you already knew that because I told you at the start. The first book I finished was Barbarian's Prize by Ruby Dixon, and the last one was The Kingdom of Sweets. The genres I spent the most time with in 2024 were romance, is anyone surprised? Obviously not, fantasy, contemporary, young adult, and historical. Here's a direct quote from Storygraph. They said, "You indulged in cheerful amusements, traversed landscapes of the heart, and chuckled through witty escapades. The narratives flowed at a comfortable, engaging tempo." I didn't do any rereads in 2024. Storygraph says that I DNF'd 5 books. It was actually 4, I just switched format for one of them, and I'm printing the book covers for them here because I sort of didn't track that in any tangible way throughout, so I just thought I'd put them somewhere. These are the 4 books that I chose not to finish this year, and that doesn't mean that they're bad books necessarily, it just means that they weren't right for me in general, or they weren't right for me at the time that I chose to read them. That 5th one that it mentioned was The Wake Up Call by Beth O'Leary. I started it on audiobook and I just could not do the audiobook for that one. Something about the narrators didn't gel with me, so I switched to ebook and it actually ended up being in my Hall of Fame, so I'm glad I switched format. The little wiggly line graph in the middle of the left page is the mood map for the year, where lighter books push the line higher and darker books push it lower. I don't read a lot of really dark stuff, so that makes sense. I'm actually enjoying putting together these reading stats pages so much that it's making me think maybe I want to do this with my Spotify Wrapped as well. That could just be fun and interesting. Not in the reading journal though, that would go in my bullet journal for sure. We'll add some extra decoration to fill in some little gaps and then we'll move on to the next spread. This spread is going to be dedicated to statistics related to rating books. What I thought of them, how I rated them, what rating system I used. This graph shows the distribution of the different book ratings possible and how many I rated by those, so 4 stars was definitely the breakaway winner. August was the month where I had the highest average rating with 3.96, and November was my lowest average rating with 3.25. In February, I read the most, 3,942 pages. My average rating for the year was 3.7 stars. Of all the books I read in 2024, the book that Storygraph users had rated the highest was Empire of Storms by Sarah J. Maas with 4.56. I rated it 3.5. And I'm just using my little broad nib pen to add some extra notes so that I know what I'm looking at in each of these circumstances, because I've really taken the stats and just chopped things up and moved them around as I liked. It's probably already really obvious from the core pile rating stickers on every single rating page and also my rating references for the core pile system in both journals, but I made a note that I also used the core pile rating system, and then I added a little note under that too to say, and I felt like I was overly critical of my reads because of it, which is true. Hence the Peach Mitsu rating system for 2025. The next spread is all about the amount of time spent reading. I wasn't actually logging audiobooks by time spent for 2024, I was logging them by the amount of pages. Storygraph can convert that, which is kind of fun, but in terms of time I still have some stats to include. The graph on the top right corner is graphing the number of books and pages read per month. In 2024, the blue line is books read and the orangey red line is pages read per month. Despite not tracking my audiobook time by hours, Storygraph knows some of that stuff anyway because of how I've logged the books. So the shortest book I read was Booked for the Holidays by Liv Maverick. It was 3 hours and 41 minutes on audio, and the longest book was Empire of Storms by Sarah J. Maas, which is 25 hours and 18 minutes. I just found a stat that says I read 64 books that were part of a series, and I wanted that to go back on the overall stats page, so I had to make some room. I spent the least time reading Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. I read that in one day, and I spent the most time reading Shadow of Night by Deborah Harkness. That one took me 38 days. The authors I spent the most time with in 2024 were Ali Hazelwood with 5 books, Christina Lauren with 5 books, and Julia Quinn with 4 books. The average length of the books I read was 361 pages, and it took me around 7 days to finish each book. My most shelved book was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. 780,094 other Storygraph users also shelved this book in 2024, and my least shelved book was Wild Hearts by Adeline Knight, which only 48 other users shelved in 2024. And the last spread is just for all of the really graphic charts, mostly pie charts. As far as format, I read 30% digital and 70% audio in 2024. I read 2% nonfiction versus 98% fiction, to nobody's surprise. And the other charts are for the different moods of the books, the page number splits, the pace, and all of the genres that I read across the whole year. And those are the stats, they're all done, and I still have a handful of pages left over at the back of the journal that will remain in case I need them. For what? I don't know, but just in case. Now both of my 2024 reading journals can be retired, and we are moving officially into the big square. The new journal setup video for this one is also available on my channel in case you want to see. I'll have that linked for you up in the top right corner here. And if any of this flip-through content has sparked your intrigue, I also have a link to the playlist of all of my reading journal videos for 2024 underneath that. Hope you have a great reading year in 2025.